Our next speaker is Simon O'Byrne, and Simon is the Senior Vice President of Community Development at Stantec. His division has 2,500 individuals that work in areas from Australia to New Zealand, North America, the United Kingdom. Because of this wide breadth of work, he has the opportunity to see the very best of city building. Because of that, he also has the opportunity to really see what happens when some of our older buildings are actually drawing away from the vibrancy and the vitality of center cities, and looking at how you leverage these and maximize these, breathe new life into them, and get creative so that they bring all of the value back to our center cities that they're capable of bringing. So I'm really excited to welcome Simon to the stage to help us take a look at how we breathe new life into some of these buildings that we all have in our center cities. Simon, welcome.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? Great. We can do a little bit better than that. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. Okay. So the cobwebs aren't too thick, so good morning. I'm really passionate about cities, and I'm really passionate about how we can transform our cities and achieve their highest and best use and achieve their ultimate potential. I'm also a big believer that as goes the downtown, so goes the city. The downtown is the brand of the city. If we go to a downtown and we can fire a cannonball down the street, it sets the impression for not just people that live there, but for visitors as well. One of the keys for many cities in North America is how do we transform that Class B and C office space into alternative uses? How do we make sure that that space is full with people? How do we make sure that our downtown streets are filled with people and active businesses? How do we achieve the potential that our downtown areas have? The challenge we have right now is that many cities have very high levels of office vacancy from their B and C class spaces. By having too much vacant B and C class space, it also holds back our A and AA space from being constructed. The brand and the currency that everybody's after is really urban vibrancy. When we go to a city and we arrive in the downtown and it's bustling with people, it sets the brand of the place. It sends the right messages. And that's really what we're after. That's really the outcome from this kind of process. How do we get urban vibrancy, which is the currency of a city? It's how we define a city. If we go to a place and the downtown is not vibrant enough, it can bring down the whole region with it. If we're honest, a lot of cities want to see brand new construction. One of the projects I've been involved with is the ICE district in Edmonton, where I'm from. We're seeing a couple million square feet of AAA office space going up, and I can tell you, we didn't see a new office building for about 20 years prior. And so it had a huge change on the culture, on the civic self-esteem of the city once we started seeing new AAA space go up. But to do that meant we had to see the office vacancies go down to a point that we could make it work. As we know, AAA space is more expensive, but the O&M costs are much lower. Likewise with B and C, it's the opposite. It is high O&M costs because there's poor skins for the building. There's also not enough amenities in these buildings, so they don't always meet the current contemporary demands of people. So what we really want to do is unlock the potential of our downtown by either adapting our B and C spaces or else taking them offline and creating the opportunity for brand new contemporary space to go up that changes the dynamic and changes the trajectory of our downtowns. Toronto is a city that didn't see office space construction for quite some time too. Then what happened was they started focusing on the downtown population, and they've gotten it to the point that in the actual downtown CBD, there's almost 300,000 people living there, of which half the population is under 40 years of age. So what happened? Once the people came, the offices followed. Offices started going from the suburbs of Toronto, where the commutes were big, to the downtown because they were following all the millennials and all the Gen Yers that were disproportionately located in the core and did not want to do the reverse commute because many of them didn't have cars and wanted an urban lifestyle. So the office space followed the talent. The result today is that Toronto now has 5 million square feet of office space under construction after seeing very little constructed for quite some time. They have the lowest office vacancy rate in North America at 1.4% office vacancy in their downtown, 4.5% in the entire region. And a lot of this started with focusing on residential, which is part of my key message, is that this office space, when we start seeing the conversion, the initial leading indicator is really about residential. Focusing on that, and then the office space follows. Now, a lot of it started back in the day. You look at Soho, for example, with the conversion of warehouses and some of the oldest Class C space into lofts. That was kind of the early thing. Almost every city in North America has seen some measure of this happening. But the key is, how do we not just convert the really cool, hip warehouses? How do we convert the kind of 1960s era office space, the very unloved 1960s modernist office space, into housing? How do we convert into boutique hotels? What are the different things that we could do with some of this space? Because it has old HVAC systems, it has asbestos often, it has not enough parking, it has not the amenities we're looking for in terms of daycare spaces, in terms of restaurants, places to shower, bike storage, etc. So some of the obvious uses are, it doesn't lend itself towards high-end housing in terms of luxury condos, but it does lend itself towards seniors housing, towards permanent supportive housing or social housing. The best thing about some of this B and C class office space is it is located in most of our respective cities in the absolute best locations, where we have the highest concentration of infrastructure, transit, amenities, and so it makes the most sense to put as many people in that space as possible. So whether it's permanent supportive housing that deals with some of the homeless population that we just heard about, or it's student housing, those are the types of low-hanging fruit that have to be targeted. Things like micro units, we're now seeing a lot of conversions where we're seeing 300 square foot units go in. And 300 square foot units delivers affordability. Even in high rent places that are having $3, $4 a square foot rent, micro units are the key to get people in. And so it's not possible as much in the outlying areas, but in the downtown where there's more amenities, there's more acceptance in the market for 300 square foot micro units. The other trend that we're seeing emerging in terms of conversion space is adult dorms. That's where basically everyone has their own bedrooms, but there's a communal living space in terms of kitchen, living room areas, so forth. We have another problem going on in terms of social isolation sometimes in our cities that's resulting in mental health issues. So the counter to this for a lot of people is, how do we provide adult dorms so people can cohabitate, share the cost, but still have privacy with their own room? We're seeing this as a growing trend in terms of conversion. Likewise, we're seeing a lot more hotel space going up. But a lot of these B and C class spaces can be converted towards housing or a hybrid, which is another thing we're just seeing. I was just in Austin at the East Guild, which was a combination of hotel, almost like an Airbnb, and rental. And so they did a combination of it. And that was an easier way to syndicate the financing of the project to make it go forward. The other obvious one that a lot of places are seeing are much more in the space of incubators and co-working spaces. City governments and bids are working together often to encourage this, particularly as it relates to technology and new startup companies. These are easier because the lease rates are lower in B and C, and we need to encourage vastly more of this construction. The other big trend right now is universities and colleges are all clamoring for space, especially affordable space. Their costs have gone up astronomically, and one of the things that they're really needing is much more affordable space. So part of it is then going as a bid or as a city government to some of the universities and colleges and looking for either a satellite campus or an expansion to help work with them on how they convert B and C class space. There's also a need and a clamoring for people to be disproportionately in the downtown. So we're seeing a big rise of the urban campus. This wasn't as much of a phenomenon 20 years ago, but many cities are now seeing the rise of the urban campus, and that's where a lot of the student population wants to be located. That doesn't have the same allegiances to the car that my generation, Gen X, or the baby boomers do. Los Angeles, if you went to where basically the old downtown was, not kind of the new Bunker Hill, but the old downtown, it was not doing that well in the 1990s. You went there, there were basically abandoned offices, factories, warehouses, et cetera. It wasn't doing that well. And what they did was they brought in an adaptive reuse ordinance in 1999. And what it did was it relaxed all the rules. So you could basically go in and jumble a whole bunch of different land uses within a building and remove the requirement for parking. So when they did that, they started seeing immediately thereafter the conversion of a lot of these B and C class office spaces into really cool uses. Everything from startups to boutique hotels to affordable rental. The conversion of this happened, and it was only allowed for by changing all the restrictive rules that we normally attach to these different buildings. Now, everyone or many people have been to the Pearl District in Portland, and it's great, it's successful, it's kind of the showpiece of Portland today, but it wasn't always the case. If you were to go to Portland back in the 80s or the early 90s, there wasn't much there. There was parking lots there, there were buildings that were vacant or partially full, and what happened was the city started looking at how do we redevelop this area? And they did study after study after study, probably did about 8 or 9 studies over the span of 20 years, looking at all different things from streetscapes to so forth. But what they really started to do that changed the game was they embarked on a TIF and rolled into a bit of a district incremental finance that allowed a pool of money to be created that would improve the storefronts, that would improve the infrastructure in the area, that could increase the dollars available for housing grants and adaptive reuse, how you could convert some of these old heritage buildings and offset some of the cost for them. It also looked at relaxing some of the parking rules that were in the area. So the Pearl was not a 2-minute story. The Pearl took a generation to happen, but it required a lot of innovation from the bid, from the city, working together collaboratively to find different financing mechanisms, different land use tools that would convert it. At the end of the day, the big tools as an urban planner, which is what I am, that are in our toolkit are tax incremental finance, and I think most of you would know quite a bit about that, or district incremental finance, so kind of capturing the value lifted in the area, that if we put in dollars today, we think that the area is going to appreciate, and we're going to capture that value and use it to finance the bond that we created in the first place to do improvements. The other thing is malleable zoning, and this is really critical. Malleable zoning means adaptive and flexible zoning. So removing parking restrictions, letting the market decide how much parking there's going to be, or allowing parking to be well off-site and not on-site. It means jumbling up uses and putting up with some of the nuisance impacts that people think will go up. It means relaxing historical preservation. Sometimes we can be a little bit too puritanical about historical preservation, and sometimes we need to allow for a glass cube to be put on top of some of our heritage buildings to make them more contemporary, to make them more flexible, to allow more light penetration into them. Sometimes we have great intent, but what it can do is truncate all new development going into an area, and that's not ultimately the outcome we want. The other thing is local improvement levies. So putting in local improvement levies is really critical for an area because it's too much in some districts to ask one developer to front end improving a whole street, and that might mean putting in a $4 million new water line, putting in $1.5 million worth of asphalt improvements and concrete. That's too much for one developer. So what's really critical here is to look at local improvement levies and getting the whole broader area to do it. Same thing with housing grants. Our experience is that depending on the city and the cost of construction, needing housing grants to incentivize that of anywhere from $15,000 a door to about $30,000 a door, those are the kind of sweet spot numbers that result in creating the incentives that's going to lead to the conversion. Likewise, tax abatement. So working with different property owners within a district to say, if you redevelop, then we're going to hold back your taxes for a period of time. Some jurisdictions legally can only do that for a year. Some can do it for as much as 10 years. But those type of tools have to be utilized. Same thing with public realm improvements and having the public take the front end in terms of doing the streetscape improvements and then waiting for the market to follow suit with that. And also relaxing bylaw standards. One of the challenges we have is that the cost of construction is really high right now throughout North America. The economy is booming, labor is a challenge in many markets. We're not getting enough bids on things. And so one of the ways to do that is how do we shorten the construction time frame Because if we can shorten the construction time frame, we can get the cost down disproportionately. So part of the key there is to relax the bylaw issues so that you can do construction 24/7. You can close down streets more readily. And so some of those nuisance issues that we have to create, that we use bylaws to get rid of, that we relax some of those to incentivize it in certain areas. Not across the board, but in the areas where we particularly want to target. The last kind of tools are the transfer of development rights in some cases. So we want to allow some areas to have much higher density and some areas to be lower. And to also allow additions on tops of buildings and to allow that flexibility. If we're not flexible and we're not adaptive, then we're going to see these areas stay the same and we're not going to achieve the ultimate panacea. What we want is urban vibrancy. Thank you very much.